This presentation explores the evolution of an interdisciplinary or a hybrid course through considering the experience of one of its recent graduates. To introduce ourselves, we run a jointly accredited postgraduate course in architecture and urban planning at the University of Dundee. I'm an architect and my teaching partner, Kirsty Macari, is a planner. But we also wanted to introduce Rebecca Foy, who graduated from the programme in 2019, as the thoughts behind this paper emerged as a result of conversation we had with Rebecca last year. Rebecca was a talented architecture student who completed Year 4 with a first-class honours degree and then opted to follow the combined MArch with urban planning pathway to complete her Part 2. After graduation, she decided that she was looking for a post-Part 2 job, not in architecture, but in planning. 6 months later, we met up initially to discuss an exhibition that she and her fellow 2019 graduates had been asked to contribute to. Working in a planning consultancy, it turned out, wasn't quite right either. Rebecca knew her skills were valued by her employers and that she had a huge amount to offer. But she now knew that while she didn't want to limit herself to solely architectural practice, she didn't want to stay within the boundaries of a conventional planning career either. She knew there was a role for her, but that this role didn't have a name or a professional body. When we developed the joint course, we did so with the ambition to equip our graduates with, quote, the skills and confidence to meet the challenges of future society and the contemporary workplace as innovative, effective and responsible individuals within increasingly complex and diverse professional contexts. So in practice, graduate architects who would not only understand in far more detail planning legislation, but also had a far more holistic understanding of the factors which influence the design and development of places and spaces, social, economic and political, and would therefore be in a better position to creatively engage those levers. And potentially some might choose to become chartered planners. They would have an innate understanding of the processes and practice of design, be skilled problem formers and problem solvers, and have detailed understandings of the way that buildings were produced, procured and constructed. In short, better planners and better architects, through having a more empathetic understanding of the position of the other. What we found in developing the course and in mapping it simultaneously against each separate professional body's criteria were significant areas of overlap in what graduates were expected to know and understand in their skills and in their approach as professionals. There is nothing in the planning curriculum that our students follow which cannot be linked to the current ARB or IBA criteria for architecture. But what the course does is change the emphasis, the students' viewpoint on their discipline. Having spent half of their final year studying the economics and politics of cities, their social structures and networks, they are more aware of the complexities of this context and are less inclined to see construction as the default answer and the handover of a building to the client as an end point. So perhaps a synthesis of architecture and urban planning is the ideal opportunity for interdisciplinary teaching and research. Going back to the beginning of discourse on inter- and transdisciplinarity in academia, writing in 1972, Heckhausen describes city planning as an interdiscipline in waiting, involving so many and so diverse a range of subjects that it manifests as, quote, a jigsaw puzzle-like composition of adjacent material fields, the whole held together by the need to address complex and compound problems which transcend disciplinary boundaries. On reflection, even though we describe the MArch with urban planning as an interdisciplinary hybrid in our course documents, it was in reality a multidisciplinary course. Students studying modules in two different disciplines, architecture and urban planning, in parallel. It has taken 5 years of gradual evolution to begin to uncover the potential of this hybridity. The course has not changed its structure. What has changed is the way that we deliver the programme and the way that the students interact with each other and with the city beyond the university. From its inception, we knew that we wanted to run the programme working with real contexts and real problems set by external partners across the Tay Cities region. This was the agenda set by one of the existing planning modules, statutory planning, which aims at understanding the legislative context of planning in Scotland. In this module, students work in small, self-selecting teams to address specific live problems, so we ran with this format. The module, the context we work with, and the student work created in those small teams creates the basis for the students' design portfolios generated across the year. And over time, this module has become transdisciplinary. To explore this definition, it considers a range of disciplinary perspectives, but individual disciplinary contribution is not differentiated but integrated. It's structured around a complex heterogeneous domain rather than a specific discipline, and it's project-focused. It attempts to devise approaches tailored specifically to that problem context. And in doing so, it draws on the knowledge, expertise and engagement of professional and civic actors beyond the academic context. This is where I need to introduce Kirsty in more depth. She initially became involved through her then role as a planning officer with Angus County Council, and with whom we collaborated during 2016 and 2017, the first year of the course. She's since joined the university as a lecturer in urban planning. Kirsty has over 14 years of local government and private practice experience, which has allowed her to refine her approach to delivering a place-based pedagogy. By taking a holistic approach to the meaningful exploration of problem forming and solution shaping alongside practitioners, the process of learning expands to one that could be considered as transformative. Planning should and can be just as creative as architecture. However, experience over the years has shown that there can be a reliance on process which impacts on the opportunities for open dialogue between professional practitioners and across disciplines. By the time that Rebecca joined the course in 2018, we, as staff, our examiners, the professional bodies and the students had more confidence. We understood how the programme worked in practice, and we could begin to experiment with what was possible. 3 distinct areas of evolution have emerged. First, in how the students work with each other across disciplines. From an initial position where disciplines attended lectures together and were assessed via the same criteria on work they produced across sometimes different contexts, to working on the same context but in separate groups, to in 2018 forming, voluntarily I would add, our first cross-disciplinary team. Since that time, a team formed only of MArch students or only of MSc students has become an anomaly. The students recognise for themselves that by being in a sole discipline team, they risk being at a disadvantage. They're aware that they will lack the full spectrum of useful skills. From distrust, even antipathy, we've arrived at a position where the students approach the opportunity to collaborate, still with some uncertainty, but with a clear recognition of the value of the process and an openness to learning from their peers. A balance which maximises the skill of those within the team and allows for the development of others as required, but they no longer see themselves in competition with each other or with other teams. The strategies produced eventually being overlaid to create the context for individual projects across both courses. Secondly, in how they work with external partners. All of our students, whether from the MArch or the MSc cohort, are exploring planning principles for the first time, and they bring together a wide variety of previous educational experience, from economics, law, architecture, landscape architecture, education, psychology and geography. The students are briefed not by us, but by conversations with planning officers in the first instance, developing and refining their understanding through conversations with other stakeholders, such as developers, community organisations and representatives, before presenting their ideas back in a number of iterative stages, perhaps engagement rather than consultation. And lastly, the community conversation. This approach generates significant interest from communities who are perhaps the ultimate expert in their own place, demonstrating how they might become involved in planning processes in the future. This shifts the position of the designer from an outside expert to a more inclusive dialogue addressing often complex situations that intervening in the built environment alone cannot solve. This dialogue has resulted in student work being exhibited in situ, bringing 1 year's work to a new community and beginning a new conversation which can then inform the next. The students gain a valuable new perspective on their work by holding conversations with those who are simply passing through a shopping centre. And although not providing all the answers, the value in seeing the possible can harness community action. Opportunity for critical reflection are fundamental in transformative learning. This year, the students' work will be exhibited in an expo booth which supports a public, private and community partnership conference, working towards the ambition of transforming Perth into a contender for the smallest sustainable city in Europe by 2040. The process the students have undertaken through both their group and individual work has resulted in a coherent vision which illustrates what form that city might take when the vision is delivered. This opportunity has arisen because of the transdisciplinary approach. The partnership between education and practice presents a rare opportunity for critical reflection and development. The lens of learning allows for detailed investigation of real issues within our streets, neighbourhoods and cities. It benefits the students by providing scenarios which enable them to extend and demonstrate their capabilities, while creating a reflective space for those already tasked with delivering place-based changes. But it becomes truly transdisciplinary in intention when it also engages with the community beyond the academic and professional practice context. Rebecca herself described this opportunity to engage as life-changing, calling it both an inspiration and a reality check. The work she was doing had the potential to make real change, and the people she engaged with were also real. She felt a responsibility to them, and she took what she was doing more seriously as a result. The context we considered in Rebecca's year was the post-industrial area of Blackness in Dundee, where the imminent opening of the new V&A Museum was changing the context, and the designation as a UNESCO City of Design seemed to present huge opportunities. Rebecca uncovered a network of makers and designers in the city, an active creative community, which even though architecture here is situated in the Art College, she'd previously been largely unaware of. Her individual design project, which grew from an initial group study in developing the creative economy in Blackness, became about designing a physical and digital interface which would allow them to connect with the city in a more tangible way and to shape the way their neighbourhood evolved. The Year March with Urban Planning was designed to prepare students for a more complex professional environment, but we did not perhaps appreciate the potential of hybridity as opposed to working in a simply interdisciplinary way. And in the context of architecture and planning, what might constitute hybrid skills? What students gain by occupying this boundary space is perhaps revealed by exploring what separates the disciplines, at least in how they are currently taught. Despite its early origins linked with architecture, surveying and engineering, planning has, since the 1950s, increasingly been aligned with social sciences in an academic context, and has adopted teaching and research methods common in those disciplines. Planning master students are more likely to hold an undergraduate degree in geography than in architecture. As such, they are adept in data analysis and in constructing well-evidenced written arguments. MArch students, in contrast, have been trained to express themselves and their ideas visually, to go through an iterative process of experimentation and reflection, often working intuitively and then post-rationalising and underpinning logic, and to accept that there is no one correct answer. To quote Wolfgang Jonas, design is the art of dealing with scientific and non-scientific knowledge, with fuzzy knowledge, with outdated knowledge, and with no knowledge at all. We're interested here in an understanding of transdisciplinary urbanism as articulated by Doucet and Janssen, that knowledge production turns around three major elements. The integration of discipline and profession, or theory and practice, an approach which is common to both architecture and planning education, and is evidenced through this project-based approach. The designingly modes of inquiry discussed above, and an ethical dimension, Here, as Doucette and Janssen point out, the MArch students are challenged by the shift in focus required by the transdisciplinary context of urban problems. Their primary concerns must extend beyond that of a client and to that of wider and future society. They must think about design over longer timescales, how and when a project might be implemented, by and for whom, and what impact such a project might have at both a local and a global level. This overlap is where Rebecca's dilemma and her strength is located. She approaches what are essentially planning problems with an understanding of the planning context, but with a designer's brain, and perhaps also with the confidence that she does not have to fit herself into any pre-prescribed disciplinary pigeonhole. We are not suggesting here that the roles of planner or of architect are no longer relevant. Disciplinary expertise is essential to professional practice. Of our now 30+ graduates, we're aware of around 10% who have moved into planning practice. The vast majority go on to complete their Part 3 and to become architects, albeit often in multidisciplinary practices which particularly value their skills in urban design and in planning. And only one, Rebecca, who has gone on to forge her own hybrid path. As a brief postscript, following our meeting last January, and as a direct result of the work Rebecca had done in Dundee during her course, she was offered a short-term contract working with the Chief Architect of the Scottish Government to develop a pilot local place plan, a new initiative designed to enable communities to contribute to future planning policy for their neighbourhoods. This completed in March 2020, so given the particular circumstances of this year, it turned into a longer contract, then helping the Scottish Government develop emergency planning guidance around the response to COVID-19. This temporarily delayed the start of her current role, working as an urban designer for an interdisciplinary design studio, which considers projects from the scale of the city down to that of streets or squares. Rebecca's experience and her subsequent reflections on it perhaps demonstrate the potential of both a different way of thinking about professional practice in urbanism and in how we might develop new educational models to facilitate this.